I haven't drilled down that far into the information.
I have a question about your comment about the dams. I mean, you're talking about dams that are in need of repair. Now, in the 71
Can we
earthquake,
move
70
through the material?
Yeah, I'm happy
Okay.
to try to answer your questions, but we have a long way.
Okay, real quick. 70 earthquake, they shut down 2 dams in this area.
Sure.
What about replacing the dams, or is there any study what it cost? Or now all of a sudden we don't have as much water dams?
Well, they have a couple of different alternatives. You can put in a new dam.
Flood insurance.
Yeah, well, no one's going to sell you that.
Yeah, that's right.
You can replace a dam, which obviously is expensive. You can get rid of dams, which they've started to do a lot in the northwest and the northeast. They've started removing some of these old dams and letting the rivers go back to their original course. They haven't done that with any major dams, and I don't think there's any plans to do that with any major dams anytime soon. Okay, so there are 5 scales of sustainability: global, regional, city, neighborhood, and dwelling. And we're going to talk, today we're going to, it's nice to know, that we're going to talk about regional, city, neighborhood, and dwelling. Global is a little beyond the scope of what we're doing. So, the umbrella of sustainability. Smart growth, new urbanism, renewable energy, and green building. I only had 3 panels, so I stuck the 2 together. If anyone finds a picture of a 4-panel umbrella, let me know. I couldn't find one. Okay, so smart growth. Strengthening and directing development towards existing communities. Existing communities have the advantage of having infrastructure already there. It's a lot cheaper to hook into an existing sewer line than it is to dig a hole and run miles of new sewer line after some new development. So, seeking to utilize the resources existing neighborhoods offer, conserve open space and irreplaceable natural resources on the urban fringe. So let's see where we go from here. So, a framework would be compact development patterns. And here's some examples of a compact development pattern. Utilization of existing urban services and infrastructure. Adequate public facilities and services are already available at development. Tying land use and transportation plans to reduce vehicle miles traveled and global warming emissions. We talked a little bit about the new state and federal laws that are requiring you to do those things. Compliance with federal transportation acts and regional MPO transportation and land use plans. And state land use legislation, local government implementation. So, the feds, the state, are pushing the local governments. They're requiring, we have a brand new green building code in this state that's required to be used. We have regional land and transportation planning that's going on as we speak because the state is mandating it and the feds are saying no planning, no money. Why do we need it? Urban and suburban communities have expanded rapidly into farmland and forested areas. Over the last 2 decades, the rate of land development has been 2 times greater than the rate of population growth. Between 82 and 97, U.S. population increased 15%. Developed land increased 34%. By 2025, an additional 68 million acres of urban and suburban development will occur if this continues at its present pace. Again, sprawl isn't sustainable. Can't do it anymore. There isn't going to be. Well, I got an email today from it was an article that was sent to me. It said in the next 20 years, global warming water needs are going to exceed water availability by 40%. Now, I know a friend of mine who once told me there's plenty of water for everybody in California. It's just not in the places where anybody lives. So, but let's talk about water here in LA. Traditionally, we get our water from the Sacramento Delta, from the snowpack in the Sierra, and from the Colorado River. So what do we know? We know that the Delta is thanks to the delta smelt and frankly lower water levels in the delta anyway, isn't going to be able to keep giving us the kind of water that we want. The Colorado River, which has been our swimming pool for a long, long time, Arizona, Nevada, and a lot of other states are saying we want our share now too. So we're not going to get all that water anymore. As for the snowpack, well, it's been a pretty good year so far this year, but if global warming goes the way everyone it's anticipated, that's not going to be necessarily a reliable water source. So we need to come up with solutions. I don't know about you guys, but every time it rains in this town, it seems to me like a billion acres of water, acre feet of water heads into the bay. And if we put it, if we put in rainwater recapture and ran our lawn and watered our lawns and plumbed our toilets off of rainwater that was saved into a cistern, we'd probably pay half as much in water, and there'd be that much more water available for what it really needs, which is cooking and drinking, and industry. Because you don't think about it, but industry uses a ton of water to make their plants work. Okay, so here's actually, this is a picture of in Atlanta, where you can see the before picture. They have these old buildings. There's a track right here, and this was essentially abandoned. And what they did is they took the old buildings and they turned them into condos, and they put in a trolley through here, and they created what we're calling smart growth, which is they created a community where there wasn't one before. So, smart growth limits growth through tiered growth boundaries, and we'll talk a little more about that. Transportation corridors or freestanding mixed-use centers. Meaningful central places and centers. Preserves environmentally sensitive lands, natural resources, and agriculture. Reduces transportation congestion, vehicle miles traveled, and global warming. This is a very interesting case. This is an important case, and I'll explain it, and then I'll tell you why it was so important. So Ramapo, New York is an area in Rockland County, outside of New York City. And what was happening in Rockland County at the time, this is mid to late 60s. What was happening at the time was that as the state was putting in these roads, all the people were coming up from the city and they were just building and building and building. And now this place was set up for minimum one house per acre. And the way things were happening, the way the developers were coming out here, that they were going to roll right to this, they were going to completely fill this county within a couple of years, and then head out to Orange County goes beyond. So what the county did is that they created a plan, essentially a 20-year plan, 18-year plan, where if you wanted to build inside the city areas, the townships, you could build now. If you wanted to build, and that was within the first 6 years. They had a plan where they expected that their infrastructure would come out to the second tier in the years 7 and 13, and as infrastructure moved out, then you could build in those areas. And then, of course, at 14 to 18 years, as the infrastructure moved out, you would go to the next tier up. So what they did is that they essentially, well, what did Einstein say? There's 4 dimensions. The standard X, Y, and Z dimensions, and then there's time. So what they did, they added the dimension of time to their zoning plan. Now this is an interesting story because there's a lady who lived out here, had a property out here. Her last name was Golden, and the National Builders Association came to Mrs. Golden, and they said, "We want to challenge this rule, this concept, because we think it's bad for us." And it obviously is in the sense that basically they were telling them, you can't build. And so we're offering you $40,000 per acre for your land, and then you're going to be our named plaintiff against Ramapo. And so that's what they did. And the case went to the U.S., went through the New York courts, went to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the court upheld the concept of tiered development. So, this is the reason I'm using this example is twofold. One is it's the first example of this tiered concept being used in the United States, and it was accepted as constitutional by the Supreme Court. The other reason I'm using it, and probably the main reason, is that my partner, Bob Freilich, was the town attorney who created this tiered system. And he was the one who took it to the Supreme Court and was successful defending the system. But the fun part about this story is that 18 years later, he moved on. He was a professor outside of New York, and he gets a telegram from Mrs. Golden in 1990. So this case this case came before the Supreme Court and was decided in 1972. In 1990, he gets a telegram. Who gets telegrams in 1990? From Mrs. Golden. She says, "Bob, call me." So he calls her. She answers the phone. She says, "Bob, thank God you weren't my attorney. Because if I had won because I just sold my property for $400,000 per acre." And so what's the lesson of this is what does every real estate agent say about property? Location, right. But location to what?
Good time to buy.
Location to schools, location to public services, location to police, location to stores, location to fire departments. You can build something out in the middle of nowhere, and it's worth whatever it's worth. But if you build it where those infrastructures exist, it's worth so much more. Adequate public facilities create value. That's the lesson. So, here's another interesting case. San Diego, California. In the 1970s, San Diego was a typical American city. People were fleeing to the outskirts and leaving the inner core. And it was, people here are old enough, we've all lived through the 70s. We know what it was like. So what the city did is it came up with this plan. It adopted the tiered system that we just talked about. And what they did is they created a plan where if you wanted to build within the urban area, come on down, you can build, no fees. If you want to build, and they created 3 tiers. This should be I-8, by the way. An urban area, a planned urbanized area, and a future urbanized area. So it was the same concept as we just saw in Ramapo, except you had the inner core, where we think that we want development to go, and somewhere down the line, maybe there'll be some development out in these green areas. And so what did they do? Well, if you were in the urban area, you could build right now. No fees, we've got sewers, we've got police, we've got parks, we've got schools, not a problem. If you want to build out here, in the PUA, the planned urban area, we are going to require you, as the developer, to pay to build everything out. And it was a lot of money. It was $27,000 per residential unit to put in sewers, put in fire departments, to do all the things that we all take for granted as part of a community. And as far as the future urbanized area, no building there at all.
Just curious, I mean, they're building a fire department station or whatever. Who's paying for the 5 firemen? How's that happening? I mean, not the people that they hire. Where does that